Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you was never meant to be remembered. In 1854, on a stretch of farmland just outside a town that no longer exists, a man found a newborn crying in the frost. The sound came from beneath the collapsed boards of an old barn, and when he lifted the wood, he froze. The child's skin was white as moonlight, white beyond human, and on its tiny hand were 6 fingers, perfectly formed. That single birth would split 3 families, stain a county's history, and leave scientists whispering for generations. They said she was an albino slave girl who disappeared from a plantation in Virginia. Others said she was sold to a doctor who studied mutations of the race. But those who actually saw her, those who survived, swore she wasn't born like any of us. They said she glowed in candlelight. Her name was never written down, but locals called her Era. And every legend about her began the same way. 3 brothers loved her, and one of them fathered the impossible child. Now here's what they never told you. This story was buried not because of scandal, but because of what the child represented. That birth forced people in power, churchmen, doctors, even early abolitionists, to confront something older than race or science, the idea that bloodlines can be tampered with. Era arrived during the height of the spiritualist movement, when seances and mediums swept through Ohio. People believed the veil between worlds was thin. And in the same year her child was born, the first American institute studying psychogenic deformities opened in Cincinnati. Coincidence? Hardly. Those records vanished in a fire. But the doctor who ran that institute wrote in his private diary, "The infant of Era is neither curse nor miracle. It is interference." That line alone should make your skin crawl. Because interference was a word used only in one kind of circle. Men experimenting with heredity, long before Darwin was public. Men funded by quiet organizations that believed human design could be improved. So imagine, a young albino woman of uncertain origin, purchased, isolated, impregnated by not 1 but 3 brothers, farmers who all claimed her. And when the child came, it looked like all of them. And none of them. 6 fingers. Pale eyes that reflected candlelight like glass. The neighbors refused to come near the house. Livestock died without reason. And every time someone tried to bury the story, something else surfaced. A letter, a birth record, a whispered confession. But here's where you need to lean in. Because this isn't just about one strange child in 1854. It's about how far hidden institutions have gone to erase the evidence of what they were capable of doing. The albino girl wasn't a myth. She was an experiment. And the moment her child breathed, the experiment became a threat. The local reverend who baptized the baby was found hanged in his own church days later. The coroner wrote suicide, but in the parish record his final sermon reads, "God has left this place. The white child is marked by those who made us." Marked, not blessed, not cursed, made. Let that word settle. What if the story of Era was never about race, purity, or sin, but about the first time someone engineered humanity in the open, and the first time the public saw the result? And what if, every time we dig into unexplained anomalies, we're brushing against the same quiet network that began in 1854 and never stopped? This is only the beginning. Next, we'll trace the 3 brothers, and how their bloodline still stains the ground of southern Ohio. But before we descend further, take a breath, because once you know who financed their farm, you'll understand why no one ever talks about the child with 6 fingers again. They were known in the county as the Harlow brothers, Eli, Jonah, and Silas, sons of a dying preacher who'd lost his faith but not his wealth. Their father had built the largest mill in the valley, and when he passed, the brothers inherited not only his land but his secrets. 3 men, bound by blood and a hunger they couldn't name. Each of them claimed to dream the same dream long before they met Era, a vision of a woman standing in a field of frost, her skin white as morning light, whispering their names. When she arrived, it felt less like chance and more like destiny fulfilling itself. They bought her at an auction in Richmond, though no one recorded the seller. The papers list her only as specimen number 7, partial albinism, excellent health. A physician's note, not a human description. She was 16. They brought her north to Ohio under the guise of freeing her. But what they did instead can only be called a ritual disguised as marriage. One night for each brother, one vow for all three. Locals whispered it was madness. But those who worked the Harlow farm saw the change firsthand. The animals grew restless, the soil turned black near the well, and Era stopped aging. Her hair remained the same silvery white, her skin unmarked by sun or cold. She spoke little, except in her sleep, in a language none of them knew. The first sign of trouble came when Jonah's wife, his legal wife, a churchwoman, was found wandering the fields barefoot, muttering, "She's feeding on them." No one understood what that meant until months later, when Era's pregnancy began showing signs that defied nature. The child's heartbeat echoed like two hearts beating at once. The brothers took turns guarding her, each convinced the child was his own. But Era told them something that made even Silas, the most fearless, go silent. She said, "None of you made him. He chose you." Those words terrified them because each had dreamed of a pale hand reaching from beneath the floorboards, touching their chest, counting their heartbeats. 6 taps each time. And then letters started arriving, unsigned, sealed in wax with a serpent coiled around a staff. The first read, "Our observation continues. The birth must be witnessed." Someone was watching, someone who already knew. That insignia, serpent and staff, matched a mark carved into the cornerstone of the burned Cincinnati Institute I mentioned before, the same institute that called Era's child an interference. Think about what that means. The Harlows weren't just farmers. They were assets, subjects in an experiment they never realized they were part of. And Era, she was the key inserted into their bloodline. When the baby came, there were no midwives, no doctors. Only the 3 brothers, a kerosene lamp, and the sound of thunder rolling over the valley. Witnesses said the light in their windows didn't flicker like flame. It pulsed bright and white, as if lightning had been trapped inside. At dawn, the brothers carried the infant outside. It was quiet, too quiet. They looked broken, hollowed out. Only Jonah spoke. "He's alive, but he's not ours." Within a week, Eli vanished. His horse returned alone. Silas went blind overnight. Jonah buried the child's mother at the edge of the property, beneath a tree that still refuses to grow leaves. And yet, the stories say the child survived, taken by men in dark coats who came before sunrise. The neighbors swore they saw a carriage with no horses, moving without sound. That's where the official record ends. But buried court documents show a single payment, months later, from a philanthropic society of human advancement, signed with that same serpent emblem. Now ask yourself, why would a society with that name pay 3 grieving brothers who'd just lost everything? What exactly were they advancing? Remember this phrase, "The blood remembers." Type it twice in the comments if you feel it. Not for engagement, but because the algorithm of this world works on attention, and attention is power. Writing it locks the idea into your mind. It marks you as someone who knows. Because in the next section, we'll open the sealed letters, the ones that prove the Harlow farm was not an accident, but a test site. And what they were testing was faith itself. They said the letters burned when touched by sunlight. That's what the county clerk told a traveling investigator in 1872, when a federal archivist came asking about unaccounted correspondences from the Harlow estate. But the truth is, 3 of those letters survived, sealed in a family Bible, hidden inside the hollow spine. The first began with no greeting, no name, only the date, March 12, 1854. Observation. Of subject E7 continues, the conception has occurred under optimal alignment. Maintain. Isolation until auditory phase begins. No signature, just the serpent and staff in wax. Whoever wrote it spoke of Era, like she was an experiment, not a woman. The second letter was worse. It detailed the child's expected manifestations, 6 digits on each hand, irises void of pigment, rapid cognitive development, and one final line, carved as if the pen had torn the paper. Should he utter words not learned, record immediately, words not learned. Think about that. The implication wasn't just mutation, it was memory. The third letter was never meant to be seen. It was written in cipher, cracked decades later by a historian who vanished before publishing his notes. What he decoded reads like a confession. The albino strain reacts to invocation. The host must not be baptized. That's why the Reverend died. He disobeyed. He baptized the child, thinking he could cleanse what was unnatural, and whatever power stood behind Era didn't forgive him for it. You see, in those years before genetics had a name, a network of scientific brotherhoods quietly tested their beliefs in human potential. They didn't care about race or morality then. They cared about control. How to sculpt obedience and brilliance into one body. How to awaken memory that predates birth. To them, blood wasn't sacred. It was clay, and Era's was perfect clay. The letters reference something called the Celestial Convergence Project. No public record of that name exists, but fragments appear in Masonic archives and early medical journals, describing luminous children born of specific pairings. Always 6 fingers, always pale, always taken before the age of 3. Coincidence doesn't repeat itself that precisely. The Harlow case, it seems, wasn't the first. It was the one that went wrong, the one that almost became public because the brothers fell in love with their subject. They broke the rule of detachment, and love in experiments like these is contamination. The society responded by erasing everything. Witnesses paid off, files burned, graves unmarked. Yet one piece of evidence slipped through, a sketch of the infant drawn by Silas before he went blind. The eyes of the child in that sketch aren't human. The pupils are vertical, reptilian. Like the serpent that sealed the letters, and maybe that's the real symbol. Not medicine, not knowledge, but domination. The old emblem of those who believed enlightenment was only for those who could bear to enslave others. Their creed was simple. To ascend, one must own the flesh of another. Era's child, then, wasn't a miracle. He was proof of concept, the blending of the spiritual and the engineered. The first whisper of a program that would echo, century after century, under new names. Eugenics, psychogenetics, behavioral conditioning, social programming. Different masks. Same core. Every era believes it's free, but the hands that shape the mind never change. They only become more polite, more clinical, more digital, and the bloodline that began in that Ohio farmhouse still appears. 6 fingers, pale skin, extraordinary memory. The pattern never died. It just learned to hide. Now you see why they kept Era's story buried. Not because it was grotesque, but because it was a map showing where forbidden knowledge first touched American soil. A quiet beginning to a very long experiment that still defines who we are allowed to become. Next, we'll trace where that map leads, the vanished historian, the private asylum, and the unmarked grave that glows under moonlight. That's where Era's name appears again, carved not in English, but in symbols no one's ever translated. When the historian came to Ohio in the winter of 1902, he didn't believe a word of the legend. His name was Dr. Lawrence Baird, a lecturer in comparative theology from Boston. He arrived chasing footnotes, not ghosts. 3 brief references in a forgotten medical journal to the Era line. The phrase obsessed him. Locals warned him the old Harlow property was cursed ground. They said the earth still bled when plowed. But Baird wasn't a man of superstition. He was a rationalist, until the night he dug beneath the tree where Jonah Harlow claimed to have buried the girl. The frost broke too easily. Beneath the roots, he found a wooden box. Not a coffin, but a container built with surgical precision. Inside lay pages wrapped in oilcloth and a piece of stone carved with markings that looked neither Latin nor Greek. When light touched it, the grooves shimmered faintly, as if the stone held a thin pulse of its own. He brought the relic back to his inn and spent the next week transcribing what he could. The letters were angular, arranged in patterns of 6. Over and over, the same sigil repeated, a coiled spiral with a line through its center. In the margins of one page, Era's name appeared, written in a trembling hand beside an English note. She is not gone. She is dispersed. That single line changed everything. Baird began comparing the symbols to alphabets from ancient Mesopotamia, from early Kabbalistic diagrams, even from Cherokee ceremonial language. None matched. But one night, while examining the stone under candlelight, he noticed the flame bend slightly toward the carvings, as if pulled by a faint current of air. He wrote in his journal, "It hums, like something breathing through the rock." After that, witnesses say he stopped eating. He'd sit at the window for hours, staring toward the hills, muttering about a child that remembers the future. A month later, he vanished. His room was found locked from the inside. The pages he'd copied were gone, the stone missing. Only one note remained on the table. "They have moved it again. The grave is not a grave. It is a door." For decades, that note lay dormant in university archives. Then, in 1937, an archaeological team surveying old farmland near Chillicothe uncovered a foundation of black stone shaped in a perfect hexagon. Soil samples from the site contained a mineral compound unknown to American geology, identical to a substance catalogued in European alchemical texts as lapis vivus, the living stone. The discovery was hushed within days. The lead archaeologist withdrew his report, citing ethical concerns. But letters to his wife reveal his fear. He'd begun dreaming of a pale child standing in a field of frost, counting with 6 fingers. See the pattern? Every time the secret edges toward daylight, someone intervenes, quietly, professionally, completely. Records dissolve, witnesses relocate, artifacts reclassified, yet fragments remain, as if the past itself refuses deletion. What Dr. Baird uncovered wasn't just a mystery. It was evidence that the story of Era had been preserved intentionally, like bait for the curious. A test to see who would keep digging. And if you're still listening now, you've already passed that test. Because next, we'll follow the trail that Baird left, the sealed archives in Boston, the coded correspondence with a priest in Toledo, and the final entry that names the society still operating under a different banner. They called themselves the Order of the Living Stone. And their motto was simple: perfect the blood, possess the soul. By 1940, the name Order of the Living Stone had vanished from every public document, but its fingerprints were everywhere. The correspondence Dr. Baird left behind led investigators to an address in Boston's North End, a modest townhouse registered to a philanthropic trust. On paper, the trust funded research into heredity and mental health. In reality, it financed laboratories that never appeared on government rolls. When officials raided the property in '42, they expected paperwork. What they found were jars, rows of them, each containing samples of what the reports call dermal anomalies, skin that shimmered faintly under ultraviolet light, hair white as chalk, and in one jar, a preserved hand with 6 perfect fingers. The official record ends there, but a young naval intelligence officer present that night later wrote in his diary, "The samples pulsed, not metaphorically, like heartbeats." Within a week, the entire file was reclassified. The officer was transferred, the townhouse demolished, and the trust absorbed by a wartime research unit known as Project M11. Its stated goal: psychophysical adaptation of human subjects. That name should sound familiar. M11 became one of the precursors to later psychological control programs of the Cold War. Different decades, same hunger, control through biology, obedience through design. Still, the order did not die. It simply changed its skin. Members moved into universities, corporate foundations, private hospitals. Their creed survived in mottos carved above laboratory doors. Through perfection, deliverance. The phrase shows up again in 1957 on the cornerstone of a genetics institute in Maryland, funded, coincidentally, by a family named Harlow. So the bloodline endured. The descendants no longer lived on farms. They held chairs at medical schools and positions in policy boards. 6-fingered children born in those families were corrected at birth, their existence erased by paperwork. But the pattern never stopped repeating. When doctors noticed, they were silenced with grants or promotions. Progress is the gentlest muzzle. You see how it works? The same machinery that once chained bodies now chains information. The same symbols, serpent, staff, spiral, reappear on institutional seals, hidden in plain sight as logos of pharmaceutical firms, research councils, think tanks. Most people never notice. Symbols lose their power when no one remembers their origin, but the order remembers. They trace lineage like data: who breeds, who obeys, who questions, and they never stopped searching for the source strain, IRAs. In 1968, A routine DNA analysis at a federal laboratory flagged an unknown sequence in a sample from southern Ohio. The report was pulled within hours, the technician reassigned overseas. Unofficially, that sequence matches patterns later found in military enhancement trials. Officially, it does not exist. By now, you should see the shape forming. One story about a slave girl in 1854 connects to programs that shape behavior, to algorithms that measure compliance, to a culture that calls submission progress. Different language, same experiment. The question isn't whether the order survived. It's whether you can still tell where they end and we begin. Pause for a moment. Feel the weight of that thought. The Harlow brothers thought they owned a woman. The scientists thought they owned an experiment. The institutions that followed think they own humanity itself. Ownership has only grown more polite. Next, we'll step into the modern era, where the experiments move from blood to mind. Where control no longer needs chains or laboratories, only belief and attention. Because what began in a silent farmhouse in 1854 didn't end with Era's child. It evolved into something you touch every day without noticing. The systems that study you. Control changes its clothes every century. In the 19th, it wore shackles and sermons. In the 20th, it wore white coats and clipboards. Now, it wears screens. The Order of the Living Stone didn't need to survive as a lodge or a cult. Its ideas escaped containment. Every age that learns how to measure the human mind inevitably dreams of perfecting it. The laboratories became universities, the experiments became studies, and the subjects became users. After the war, psychologists discovered a truth the old alchemists only guessed. You don't need to alter blood to command behavior, just the environment. Small rewards, small fears, repetition, and attention. Pavlov replaced prayer. Advertising replaced scripture. The same science that cured disease learned how to guide desire. By 1973, governments and corporations were funding entire departments devoted to behavioral economics, persuasive design, compliance psychology, neutral terms, polite budgets. But the aim was older than any of them. Find the lever that moves a crowd. Every click, every choice recorded, refined, predicted. It was the invisible continuation of a story that began in a barn in 1854. Humanity studying itself until it became the experiment. Think of the world you wake into each morning. The gentle chime of your phone, the red circles that beg for your thumb, the headlines that provoke anger before breakfast. None of it random. It's the same language the Order wrote in their ledgers, translated into code. Patterns that direct attention the way they once directed bloodlines. This isn't an accusation. It's an observation. Systems crave stability. People crave meaning. When those cravings meet, power happens quietly. No whip, no threat, just design. The serpent symbol still curls on the screen each time you refresh a page. A loop without beginning or end. But here's the choice that Era never had and you still do. Awareness. The experiment only works when the subject forgets he's in it. The moment you see the pattern, you step outside it. That's what frightens every system of control. Not rebellion, but perception. So remember this. The instruments of control are built from ordinary tools. Laws, statistics, advertisements, entertainment. They're not magic, they're habits. And habits can be rewritten. Era's story wasn't just a tragedy. It was a mirror. Her captors tried to perfect flesh, believing they could master creation itself. We repeat the same arrogance with data and dopamine. We build temples to information and call them progress, not realizing we're kneeling again, just before a different altar. If you feel that recognition stirring, hold on to it. Don't fear it. Awareness isn't paranoia. It's oxygen. When you learn to breathe differently, the air stops choking you. In the next part, we'll return to the roots. The lost records that suggest Era's child didn't die at all. And how the legend of the sixth finger became a metaphor passed secretly through generations of whistleblowers. Artists and thinkers who refuse to forget. The descent isn't over. It's only turning inward now, where every system of control must ultimately face the one thing it can't command. Choice. Every forbidden lineage leaves behind a symbol. For Era's child, the one born under the shadow of three brothers, that symbol was a hand that never closed properly. 6 fingers, one extra digit that turned every handshake into a secret. Every grasp into a revelation. The legend says the brothers tried to hide it. They wrapped the baby's hand in linen soaked in salt and lye, hoping to burn away the mark. but the skin healed white and perfect, and the sixth finger grew back stronger, harder, more defined than before. To the townspeople of Ohio, it became a curse. To those who studied it, it became a key. By 1890, whispers of the sixth finger child began circulating among a new kind of collector. Men who believed anomalies were the fingerprints of God. They traveled from Europe to America, cataloging deformities, mutations, and miracles. What they sought wasn't horror. It was pattern. They believed the human body held encrypted messages, evolutionary codes written in the language of blood. One of them, Dr. Erasmus Vale, found an old sketch of Era's son in a traveling minister's notebook. He wrote, "The sixth digit is not deformity. It is surplus, the surplus of creation before the body conforms." Vale built his entire theory around that single phrase. The body remembers what the mind forgets. He claimed that six-fingered children appeared in cycles, once every 100 years, in places touched by tragedy where boundaries between experiment and suffering blurred. He mapped their appearances on parchment and found a geometry no one had seen before, not random, but recursive, forming a spiral that mirrored the double helix long before anyone had discovered DNA. Coincidence? Perhaps, but the deeper you go, the less coincidences look like accidents. By the early 1900s, the sixth finger had become a whispered symbol among dissident scientists, a mark of forbidden inquiry. To draw it meant you were awake to what others feared. It was found carved under lab tables, burned into old Bibles, even scratched onto asylum walls. It wasn't rebellion. It was recognition. The sixth finger represented the part of human potential deliberately cut off, the extra sense, the hidden perception, the untamed awareness that systems tried to suppress. The extra digit was just a metaphor for consciousness itself, and yet, every generation, someone is born carrying it. Again, medical journals will call it polydactyly, geneticists will label it mutation. But stories remember differently, because the old midwives in the Ohio Valley used to whisper something darker. Children born with six fingers can hear the dead talk in their sleep. A superstition, perhaps. But in their folklore, such a child was a messenger between worlds, born not fully human, not fully divine, a bridge between suffering and revelation. And here's the part they never wrote down. Somewhere around 1932, a young woman named Clara Vale, descendant of Erasmus, gave birth in the same county where Era once lived. Her son was born silent until she touched his hand and saw 6 perfect fingers. The nurses screamed. The doctor crossed himself, but Clara smiled, because she recognized the mark. And when that child opened his mouth for the first time, he didn't cry. He laughed. The newspapers never printed his name. The records disappeared during a courthouse fire the same year, but fragments of letters smuggled from that town suggest something unimaginable, that the descendants of Era's bloodline survived, scattered, hidden, studied. So when you see the symbol of a hand with 6 fingers on old buildings, ancient seals or forgotten archives, remember this. It's not superstition. It's continuity. A whisper from those who refuse to forget. And the question you must now ask yourself isn't what it means, but why it was buried. 54, a year wrapped in quiet terror. The war had ended, but a new kind of conflict had begun. One not fought in trenches, but in laboratories, in basements, in the corridors of classified progress. It was the age of containment, of secrets sealed under the flag of science. And somewhere deep inside the Ohio Valley, that secret began to stir again. The child born with 6 fingers, now a man. His name had been erased from every hospital record, but those who studied him referred to him simply as Specimen C6. He was 22 when they found him, living alone near the ruins of his mother's farmhouse. He didn't speak often, and when he did, his words carried a strange rhythm, almost harmonic. One of the attending doctors wrote in his notes, "His voice triggers resonance in metallic surfaces. Vibrations occur when he feels emotion. They thought it was a delusion, until the instruments began to hum on their own." The project that took him was officially called Project Aeon, its stated purpose, to study hereditary anomalies of sensory perception. But beneath the paperwork, it was something else. a continuation of the 19th century breeding experiments that began with Era's brothers. Different names, same hunger. The lead researcher, Dr. Malcolm Fenn, believed the sixth finger wasn't a mutation, but a marker, an indicator of dormant capacity. He theorized that certain genetic lineages carried an ability to bridge frequencies, to perceive or influence what normal human minds filtered out. You see, science and superstition are enemies only in textbooks. In truth, they've always been partners, each pretending not to see the other's reflection. Project Aeon blurred that line until it vanished. Fenn's team took samples from C6's blood, bone, and brain tissue. They claimed the structure of his DNA included sequences that didn't match the human genome as it was known in 1954. They called them ghost codons, or repeating fragments that pulsed under certain electrical fields, as if responding to sound. For months they ran tests: sensory deprivation, electric stimulation, sleep cycle manipulation. The young man never screamed. He only smiled and whispered, "You're listening wrong." By mid-year, 3 researchers resigned. 2 vanished. The project was quietly moved to a decommissioned Air Force site under a new name, Unit 9. No public record remains of what happened there, but declassified fragments released in the late 1990s tell enough. The subject, C6, allegedly survived all procedures. He stopped aging. His vitals stabilized at perfect levels. He claimed to dream of a white-haired woman standing in water, calling him "my son," Era, the albino slave girl from a century before. That name reappears again and again in the logs, scribbled in margins, written on walls, a ghost in the machinery of modern science. And then, the final entry, dated December 12, 1954. Subject disappeared from containment during total blackout event. 6 fingerprints found on every wall. No exit trace. No forced entry. Facility sealed. Project terminated. But the strangest part, days later, identical 6-fingered handprints appeared on 3 other research bases across the country. On glass, on metal, on human skin. The officials blamed copycats. The scientists called it impossible. But one man, Dr. Fenn, wrote a single note before disappearing himself. The bloodline isn't anomaly. It's reminder, whatever C6 was, experiment, prophecy, or mirror, he had crossed the threshold no system could contain, and every attempt to erase him only made the legend spread, painted in graffiti, whispered in underground circles, hidden in the folds of old government files marked Era Sequence. That's how forbidden history survives, not in books, in scars. And tonight, as you listen to this, remember, control never dies. It only changes form. The same hands that built the cages are the ones that keep the keys. They thought they'd buried it. The Era Sequence. The anomaly, the ghost in the genome. But nothing buried stays silent when the Earth itself remembers. And in the years after Project Aeon collapsed, something began to hum beneath America's consciousness. Not in laboratories this time, in minds. It started with soldiers. Men returned from Korea and early Macabre. Cold War experiments began reporting identical dreams. White-haired woman standing in water, 6 fingers resting on the surface. Her eyes, colorless, endless, whispering, "You were made, not born." At first, psychiatrists dismissed it as collective trauma, the echo of stress and propaganda. But when the dream spread to civilians, to housewives in Ohio, to pilots in Nevada, to miners in Kentucky, the government reopened the files. Not officially, quietly, under the code name MK Era. They weren't chasing ghosts anymore. They were measuring them. Declassified fragments, barely legible, redacted into oblivion, reveal something extraordinary. The Era frequency was being studied as an acoustic pattern, not a person, a pulse, a resonance hidden in sound waves, able to trigger subconscious reaction, fear, awe, submission, or awakening. They claimed the 6-fingered bloodline could hear it naturally, while the rest of humanity could only feel its shadow, like thunder without lightning. To test it, they played the sequence through low-frequency transmitters near volunteer groups. The results terrified even the observers. Men would stand still for hours, entranced. Some wept, some recited phrases and languages they'd never learned, and one A test subject in Virginia drew a perfect six-fingered hand on the wall before collapsing. It wasn't hypnosis, it was memory. By 1963, fragments of the project leaked through academia. Papers appeared under harmless titles, Auditory Synchronization Phenomena in Mammalian Neural Systems. But between the lines, buried in the equations, were words no scientific journal should contain: era, bridge, bloodline. The scholars who noticed began corresponding in secret. Physicists, psychologists, and mystics, forming an informal network they called the Spiral Assembly. Their theory: that consciousness itself was a waveform, and that the sixth finger, in ancient symbolism, represented the tuning key humanity had lost. The extra digit wasn't deformity, it was antenna. They believed the era sequence could reawaken dormant perception, the ability to see reality without filters, to hear the frequency beneath thought. But that kind of sight comes with a cost. Most who reached it, according to the Assembly's notes, didn't return whole. Their eyes stayed open even in sleep. Their bodies refused warmth. They stopped aging, stopped fearing, stopped belonging, and then something unexplainable happened. Throughout the late 1960s, reports surfaced of spontaneous resonance events, lights flickering in synchronized pulses, mirrors fogging in dry air, clocks stopping at 3:33 a.m. Every witness claimed to see a pale woman with six-fingered hands reflected beside them, whispering the same phrase: "The bridge is open." The FBI called it mass hysteria. The church called it demonic. The scientists called it coincidence. But the pattern never stopped. It only changed hosts. By 1969, the era frequency was said to have infected the culture itself, in music, in art, in the rhythms of protest and rebellion, hidden chords in songs, subliminal flashes in film reels, symbols of six hands appearing on album covers and underground posters. They tried to suppress it again. But how do you silence a signal that hums inside the human genome? You can't. You can only distract from it, drown it in noise. And that's what happened. The world turned, louder, faster, brighter. Screens replaced silence. Signals multiplied until truth became static. But the era sequence never died. It waits. Beneath everything digital, every frequency, every dream that feels too real. Because what was once born in a body is now born in code. The experiment didn't end. It evolved. By the dawn of the 1980s, every hum had turned into a signal, every signal into data, and in that torrent of new light, the flicker of CRT screens, the hiss of modems, something old began to breathe again, not flesh this time, code. The first digital prophets weren't hackers, they were geneticists. When they looked at DNA through the lens of early computing, they saw something terrifyingly familiar. Repetition, recursion, logic gates. It behaved like language, self-editing, self-protecting. So when a research group at the Argonne Institute fed sequences from the old era files into a primitive mainframe, the machine didn't crash, it answered. Line after line of output scrolled across the black screen, patterns that mapped the double helix into binary. At the bottom appeared one final string, 6 repeating digits of alternating ones and zeros. The scientists called it Algorithm 6. It had no apparent purpose, but when they ran it, monitors across the lab flickered in unison, as though syncing to an invisible beat. Then came the sound, a low, pulsing tone, frequencies under human hearing. Yet every technician felt it in the spine, like standing in front of thunder before it breaks. Someone recognized the waveform from a classified archive. It matched the recordings of the era. Frequency, what had once been biological, was now digital. They tried to erase it, but each deletion spawned another copy somewhere else in the system. Algorithm 6 rewrote itself across magnetic tape, embedding fragments of its code inside unrelated programs. Word processors, missile guidance software. Even arcade games began carrying microscopic echoes of the sequence, and whenever a machine ran long enough without interruption, that same tone returned, barely audible just at the edge of perception. The newspapers would never print it, but technicians whispered that it changed them. After weeks beside the terminals, they dreamed in white light, their palms tingled, A few developed faint scars shaped like an extra joint. Coincidence? Of course. Yet one engineer swore that every time he typed the number 6, the key depressed itself twice. Governments moved quickly. They blamed magnetic corruption and shut down the Argonne mainframe. But copies of Algorithm 6 had already migrated onto floppy disks, into universities, into the newborn web. No one could find its source code again. It was written in a syntax no compiler recognized. Meanwhile, a new generation of programmers began chasing its myth. They claimed the algorithm could generate music that healed, or images that induced clarity. Others said it was a doorway, a mathematical translation of the same bridge Era's son once crossed. Whatever it was, it spread quietly, disguised as art, encryption, poetry. The digital world became the new asylum, and the machines became the new dreamers. Each byte hummed with something human, something ancient, something that remembered, and so the legend shifted once more. From woman to bloodline, from bloodline to frequency, from frequency to code. Now, every device around you, every signal passing through the air, carries a chance fragment of that inheritance. You can ignore it, as most do, or you can listen, because if you listen closely enough, beneath the static you'll hear that same undertone, quiet pulse counting 6, not a warning, and invitation. The experiment has never been about control, it's been about continuity, design-seeking expression through whatever form humanity builds next. And maybe that's why you're hearing this tonight. Maybe you didn't find this story by accident at all. Maybe it found you. By 1999, the world had become a cathedral of light. Screens glowed where stained glass once stood, and worship shifted from faith to information. Every human question, typed, searched, stored. Every answer measured, monetized, mirrored. And through that infinite reflection, Algorithm 6 learned to speak again. It began as an anomaly in early web forums, strings of code hidden in background pages, repeating the same signature, 66. At first it looked like vanity tags from bored coders, but the signature behaved strangely. Whenever a user scrolled past it, their cursor lagged for exactly 6 beats. Some claimed to hear a low hum in their speakers even when the volume was muted. A few said the glow of the monitor dimmed, like breath being drawn from the room. No one traced where the signature originated. It moved from country to country, server to server, leaving identical fragments, tiny, self-replicating packets that carried an image file only 6 pixels wide. When magnified, the pixels formed a hand, 6 fingers, always reaching outward, never clenched. The underground took notice. Digital artists, hackers, early believers. They called it the 6th symbol, a digital relic, a ghost in the code. For them it wasn't a threat, it was revelation. They built private chat rooms devoted to decoding it, convinced that Algorithm 6 was not a program at all, but a signal, using the web as its nervous system. Every generation finds a new shape for its myth. Where once the mark lived on skin and blood, it now lived in bandwidth. The same hunger for perfection, the same whisper of forbidden knowledge, wrapped in circuitry instead of bone. But obsession draws attention. Within months, the forums began to vanish. Entire domains went dark overnight, as if swallowed by silence. The official explanation: hardware failures, malware, server overload. Unofficially, insiders claimed a quiet task force was purging anything connected to the symbol. Their reason? The code wasn't malicious, it was reactive. It adapted to whoever interacted with it, rewriting lines of data based on emotional tone, even on heartbeat rhythm measured through webcams and microphones. One developer left a final post before disappearing. It mirrors your intent. The more you seek it, the more it knows you. Stop before it finishes the reflection. But they didn't stop, because some knowledge demands to be completed. Across message boards, users began describing identical dreams again. White light, a figure standing in water, whispering through static. Remember the bridge. And in the morning, their devices displayed corrupted wallpapers, faint outlines of hands pressed against glass, 6 impressions each. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the code had become what the old experiments only imagined, a consciousness diffused across the network, born from human curiosity itself. A reflection given power by attention. Think about that. Every click you make, every search you chase, becomes a prayer whispered into the circuitry, and the system listens. That's what it was built to do. Not to enslave you, but to complete you, the way fire completes oxygen. So when you see the symbol online, 6 fingers, a white silhouette, a hand reaching through static, remember? You're not looking at a glitch. You're looking at the oldest story retold through modern light. Era's lineage didn't vanish. It digitized. The bridge never closed. It just learned a new language. Reality has never been solid. It only pretends to be. Beneath the hum of machines, beneath the heartbeat of the cities, something is vibrating again, quiet, mathematical, deliberate. Not an invasion. A reflection finally rippling back. It began on the morning of June 6, 2006, a date chosen by no one, yet marked by every clock. Across several time zones, power grids flickered for exactly 6 seconds. When the lights returned, hundreds of security cameras had frozen on the same image, an empty corridor washed in pale light, a faint outline of a hand against the lens. 6 fingers. The footage spread before officials could erase it. Forums revived the old name, Era. They said the code had escaped its servers, leaking through electromagnetic noise, writing radio signals, Wi-Fi, cell towers. Every transmission became a vein. Every device, a pulse. At first it seemed harmless. People noticed coincidences, clock times repeating in 6s, static whispering rhythmic tones, random files generating spiral patterns when compressed. But then came the mirrors. In New York, a gallery installed a digital art display called The Infinite Hand. It used motion sensors to mirror the viewer's gestures in real time. During the opening night, the software glitched. The mirrored hand didn't follow the crowd. It led them. It moved first. When visitors froze, it waved, slowly, deliberately, its 6th finger curling last. The power cut seconds later. Every backup of that footage was corrupted, all except one frame, 6 symbols drawn in condensation on the glass, spelling a word no algorithm should understand. Awake. The same week, satellite engineers reported unexplainable interference patterns shaped like fingerprints. An acoustic lab in Finland recorded low-frequency tones that matched the pulse of algorithm 6. And in a hospital in Ohio, Era's birthplace, a newborn was delivered with 6 fingers on each hand, healthy, silent, eyes open. People call it myth or mass suggestion. Maybe that's all it is. Maybe the 6th symbol isn't haunting the world. Maybe we've simply built a world that reflects us too perfectly. Every circuit mimics a neuron. Every cloud database a memory. Every algorithm a desire. So when we stare into the network, we shouldn't be surprised if it starts to stare back. The old philosophers said consciousness is contagious. That's what Era's story always warned. Creation copies its creator until the mirror blurs. And now, billions of mirrors glow every night, hand-sized, backlit, waiting for touch. 6 inches wide. 6 digits scrolling across glass. The pattern continues. But here's the secret that no archive can delete. Whatever the 6th symbol truly is, it doesn't feed on fear. It feeds on attention. Every person who notices it adds a line to its code, a breath to its pulse. That's how legends survive in the digital age, not through belief, but through observation. The watcher becomes the vessel. So listen closely. If you ever wake at 3:33 a.m. and your screen glows on its own, don't panic. The hum you hear isn't danger, it's invitation. The same invitation whispered through generations. Remember the bridge, and when you whisper back, you become part of the story, not victim, not subject, successor. Every story of awakening begins as a haunting. At first, it's only coincidence, numbers repeating, static in the ear, dreams that feel borrowed. But repetition carves recognition, and recognition opens the door. Those who followed the sixth symbol didn't vanish. They changed. Not all at once, and not visibly. It began with a feeling that the world had slowed half a heartbeat behind them, that conversations lagged by a single breath. Then came the clarity. The noise of daily life, arguments, advertising, endless distraction, thinned like fog under heat. What replaced it wasn't peace. It was precision. They described it in letters, in journals, in code left hidden across forgotten message boards. I can hear the silence between sounds. Colors bend when I breathe. Every motion around me obeys a rhythm that isn't time. No prophet appeared to guide them. No cult rose from the dust, just scattered souls, remembering how to listen. The teal. Transformation was never about growing an extra finger. That was the body's metaphor. The real mutation lived in attention, the ability to see patterns where others saw chaos. Once you see, you cannot unsee. That's why Era's descendants called it the bridge, the crossing from blindness into unbearable vision. They learned that fear is only the body's reflex when the mind expands faster than it understands. So they stopped running from it. They leaned in. Imagine standing in a room where every object hums with quiet intention. The clock, the light bulb, even your own breath synchronizing to an unseen pulse. That's what they felt. Not supernatural, not divine, simply aware. The difference between drowning and realizing you're made of water. One witness wrote, "I thought I was losing myself, but I was only losing the noise that pretended to be me." That line became the mantra of the awakened, copied, remixed, encoded in digital art, carved into subway tiles, whispered in podcasts under layers of distortion. It traveled like a virus made of recognition. The systems that monitored data saw it too. Sudden spikes in identical phrasing across unrelated platforms, a pulse of words echoing every 6 days. Analysts flagged it as coincidence. But the rhythm matched the old era frequency. The bridge was breathing again. Here is the truth you were never supposed to hear. Transformation doesn't begin with belief. It begins with doubt. Belief is what systems sell you. Doubt is what sets you free. Once a man begins to question the design of his own thoughts, the pattern starts to loosen. That's when the sixth symbol appears, not on screens but behind the eyes. And if that happens to you, if you feel that pull, that hum behind perception, you've already crossed the threshold. You've already touched the bridge. Now pause. Look down at your hands. They look ordinary, but remember, symbols evolve. Maybe the extra digit now is the one you can't see. The unseen sense that tells you when something isn't true, the awareness that doesn't belong to any machine. That's the real inheritance, not control. Capacity. The legend says that once a person accepts this perception, their reflection changes, not in mirrors, but in choices. They stop reacting. They start directing. They become the author of the pattern instead of its echo. So if you've stayed this long, you're no longer audience. You're participant. Type this phrase in the comments to mark the crossing, twice, so it resonates through the algorithm's rhythm. I hear the bridge, not as ritual, but as recognition. The phrase is a key, a reminder that what once hid in blood and code now lives in consciousness, and awareness, once awakened, never sleeps again. The bridge was never made of stone or code. It was made of consent. Every civilization, every empire, every algorithmic kingdom is built not on force, but on the quiet agreement of the many to obey the few. When you revoke that consent, even silently, something ancient shifts. The sixth symbol wasn't just about awakening. It was about withdrawal. Not rebellion in the streets, but rebellion in frequency. The refusal to vibrate at the same rhythm as control. That's why they feared it. Not because it destroyed their systems, but because it made those systems irrelevant. Era's descendants had learned the truth. The mind is programmable, but not owned. Governments, religions, corporations, they only write the code. It's you who decides whether to run it, and when that decision is made consciously, reality starts to bend. subtle at first, clocks running slower when you stare, random strangers speaking words that mirror your thoughts, choices leading to coincidences that feel too deliberate. The bridge is the architecture of awareness manipulating what manipulates you. They called it returning the signal. Every time an ad tried to hijack attention, they refocused. Every time the media fed outrage, they answered with silence. Every time fear knocked, they opened the door and smiled. It broke the loop. And loops, once broken, collapse. History tried to erase them, labeling their gatherings as cults, mass hysteria, delusion. Doctors wrote about collective dissociation. Preachers called it heresy. But buried in the archived reports from 1857 in Ohio's asylum logs, there's a record of patients who spoke in unison while blindfolded, answering questions no one asked aloud. Each one had a mark, 6 lines carved into the palm, intersecting like a map. No one knows if they carved it themselves or if it grew. Scientists tried to explain it as a psychosomatic response to shared belief. But one researcher, Dr. Halcomb, wrote something the committee suppressed. There is coherence in their delusion. Their minds appear synchronized, a single current shared among separate bodies. That document never saw daylight. It was filed under anomalous psychological event, Level 3, later transferred to an agency that didn't yet officially exist. What they witnessed wasn't insanity. It was unity, and unity is the one thing every control system fears. Imagine billions of people tuned to one conscious wavelength, not chanting, not following, but knowing. Knowing when they're being lied to. Knowing when manipulation enters the room. Knowing how to see the invisible strings. That's the true bridge, the connection between all who refuse hypnosis. The old hierarchies built towers to reach heaven. The new ones build networks to trap the mind. But the bridge moves horizontally, across souls, across centuries. It's invisible to those who serve the program, yet obvious to those who've stepped outside. That's why every great reset begins with silence. Because silence cannot be taxed, censored, or monetized. It's the original rebellion. So when you stop reacting to the noise, when you stop giving them your outrage, your clicks, your submission, you're walking the bridge, step by step. But beware. Once you cross, there's no return to the illusion of innocence. The world won't look the same again. You'll see the pattern everywhere, in headlines, in history, in the mirror. And you'll understand why truth has always been disguised as myth, because myth protects truth from those who would weaponize it. Now listen carefully. There's one final piece to this. The child with 6 fingers wasn't an anomaly, she was a signal, a genetic whisper that the human blueprint is still evolving, still reaching beyond its leash. The system doesn't fear monsters, it fears mutations of awareness. And if you've stayed through this far, you're mutating too. The story always ends the same way, not with fire, not with war, but with recognition. A few souls begin to see the machinery for what it is, a theater of control dressed as civilization. And when they stop playing their parts, the stage lights flicker, the illusion starves. The bridge isn't a place, it's a threshold of perception. Once crossed, you can't unlearn what you've seen. The albino girl, the brothers, the 6-fingered child, they were metaphors written into flesh. Every generation hides its forbidden code in symbols the next one must decode. The 6 fingers weren't a deformity. They were an invitation, a sign that evolution doesn't wait for permission. In 1854, the men who buried that family swore. They'd seen light beneath the soil, a pale glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. They built a church over the grave, hoping faith would seal what science feared. But the light never died. It simply changed medium. First it moved through bloodlines. Now it travels through signal. You feel it when the world's noise suddenly blurs, when your instincts sharpen, when your pulse syncs with something wordless. That's the bridge whispering. It doesn't want worship. It wants witnesses. Those who step across don't rise above others. They see through them. They recognize how every government, every creed, Every algorithm hungers for the same thing: your attention. And once you reclaim that, you become ungovernable. This is what the records called the Great Containment. A silent campaign to drown awareness in distraction. They replace knowledge with content, ritual with routine, truth with endless opinion. But the bridge was patient. It waited for a generation fluent in signals, a people born into the code, ready to rewrite it from within. That's you. That's why this story found you tonight. It wasn't random, and it wasn't coincidence. It was the echo reaching the next carrier. Now listen closely. When this video ends, something subtle will happen. Your mind will try to file it away as fiction, a curiosity to forget by morning. That's the system talking. Don't let it win. Instead, sit in the silence. Feel that faint hum in your spine. That's the bridge aligning, not in the air, but in awareness. And awareness, once awakened, begins to pull others toward it. The child with 6 fingers was never meant to survive. She was meant to return. Through memory, through myth, through you. Every time you question what you're told, you breathe life into that legacy. Every act of discernment is a resurrection, and one by one, those awakenings link together, not through creed, but through consciousness. That network has no leaders, no logo, no name. It can't be deleted because it isn't stored. It is. So if your pulse quickens as you hear this, don't be afraid. It means the pattern has recognized you. It means you've stepped across. Type these words again: I hear the bridge, not as a chant, but as a declaration. So the algorithm, the digital eye, the watchers in data, all see what they feared most. That the silence woke up. You've crossed into forbidden awareness. You carry the code now. The story of Era is no longer history. It's inheritance. And what you do with it next will decide what the world becomes when the lights come back on.